Hey y'all, this is our second read in Unit 6, The Legend of King Arthur. Our focus for today is on the key events and summarizing what those key events are. So while I'm reading this out loud, that's what you should be focused on. What are the key events, what's happening in the text. We'll go over it with these two pages, and then you guys will be also looking at doing it for these stanzas here. Alright. The Legend of King Arthur. And remember that our essential question is, what inspires a quest? So looking at our images here, we can see that this is supposed to be King Arthur. He's holding some sort of fruit here. And then over here we can see somebody talking to King Arthur, and they're like in this castle with all of these plants, maybe a castle that's in ruins. We're not really sure what's going on here. Okay. The Legend of King Arthur. King Arthur was a legendary ruler of England in the 6th century. According to some legends, only Arthur was able to pull a sword from a stone, thus proving he was heir to the throne. With his Knights of the Round Table, Arthur embarked on numerous quests and adventures, righting wrongs and defending the kingdom. Arthur and his knights killed dragons, rescued damsels in distress, and fought bravely. Arthur was a good and just king, proud but also filled with compassion. He and his knights followed a strict code of chivalry. They acted with honor and integrity. Camelot, the castle and court where King Arthur ruled, has become a symbol of a fair and just place. King Arthur's main advisor was Merlin, a wizard who could know the future, and so he often made sure that King Arthur lived and won his battles. Historical records indicate that Arthur may have been based on a real person who lived in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Over time, as the tales were retold, his deeds and successes grew in importance and led to the telling of new tales. Thus, a legend was born. So this is basically saying that King Arthur is a legend based on a real person. So he's larger than life. He didn't necessarily do all the things that we're going to be reading about that he supposedly did, but he was so amazing. The real person that he's based on was so amazing that they made him sound better than he was in history. Okay. Chivalry, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term at all. It's kind of an older term. We tend to think of chivalry today as meaning a man will hold open a door for a lady, or that he will pull her chair out when she goes to sit down for her and help her get set up in her seat. It's really just manners. It doesn't necessarily mean between genders. It can just mean having good manners, right? We don't cough all over each other or do things like that. Being chivalrous just means being very gentlemanlike and having a set code of morals, where you're acting in a manner that would be that of a knight. So you're really trying to be a good person, I guess is how you could put it in the simplest form. Alright. King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table have appeared in plays, poems, and books. Noted 19th century British poet Alfred Tennyson wrote Idylls of the King, a long narrative poem that tells the saga of King Arthur. Arthurian legend has been the subject of a long-running Broadway musical, Camelot, as well as feature films and television series. Arthur, his knights, and their exploits have directly influenced dozens of writers and modern works of literature by serving as the template for noble-minded, heroic quests. The story on the following pages is from a collection of Arthurian tales called King Arthur, Tales of the Round Table, originally published in 1902. At this point, early in the story, Merlin has rescued Arthur from a battle and helped to heal him. On that note, a really good movie that's probably pretty dang old, I don't know if you guys will be able to find it, is called something in King Arthur's Court. Let me 1 second. So it's a Disney movie, and it was made in 1995, so it's older than all of you. But it came out when I was 4, and it's called A Kid in King Arthur's Court. And it's really interesting to watch, just to see all the different features of what King Arthur's court would look like back then, but it's also really entertaining in that it's a kid from, like, your age being transported back in time to this really old place. Okay. The Sword of Excalibur, an excerpt from King Arthur's Tales of the Round Table. You see this image here. That's supposed to be King Arthur. This is the Lady of the Lake. I do believe that in the myth, she's the one that helps him figure out how to get the sword out of the stone, if I'm not mistaken. Written by Andrew Lang. King Arthur had fought a hard battle with the tallest knight in all the land, and though he struck hard and well, he would have been slain had not Merlin enchanted the knight. Merlin cast him into a deep sleep. Then he brought the king to a hermit who had studied the art of healing. The hermit cured all his wounds in 3 days. Then Arthur and Merlin waited no longer, but gave the hermit thanks, and departed. As they rode together, Arthur said, "I have no sword," but Merlin bade him to be patient, and told him he would soon give him one. In a little while they came to a large lake. Arthur beheld an arm rising out of the water in the midst of the lake, and holding up a sword. "Look," said Merlin, "that is the sword I spoke of." And the king looked again, and a maiden stood upon the water. "That is the Lady of the Lake," said Merlin, "and she is coming to you. If you ask her courteously, she will give you the sword." So when the maiden drew near, Arthur saluted her, and said, "Maiden, I pray you tell me whose sword that is. Whose sword is that which an arm is holding out of the water? I wish it were mine, for I have lost my sword." "That sword is mine, King Arthur," answered she, "and I will give it to you, if you in return will give me a gift when I ask you." "By my faith," said the king, "I will give you whatever gift you ask." "Well," said the maiden, "get into the barge yonder, row yourself to the sword, and take it and the scabbard with you." For this was the sword Excalibur. "As for my gift, I will ask it in my own time." Then King Arthur and Merlin dismounted from their horses and tied them up safely. They went into the barge, and when they came to the place where the arm was holding the sword, Arthur took it by the handle. The arm disappeared. And they brought the sword back to land. As they rode, the king looked lovingly on his sword. Merlin saw, and smiling said, "Which do you like best, the sword or the scabbard?" "I like the sword," answered Arthur. "You are not wise to say that," replied Merlin, "for the scabbard is worth 10 of the sword, and as long as it is buckled on you, you will lose no blood, however sorely you may be wounded." So they rode into the town of Carlion. There Arthur's knights gave them a glad welcome. They said that it was a joy to serve under a king who risked his life as much as any common man. So, as you can see, this is definitely a legend. Some things that give it away are the fact that there's this random arm underwater that's holding up a sword, and it disappears as soon as Arthur takes the sword, as well as the fact that Merlin talks about how the scabbard will always protect King Arthur from ever losing any blood. So down here, right, you will lose no blood, however sorely you may be wounded. Even this is saying that even if King Arthur is injured, somebody stabs him or cuts him with a sword, he will not bleed as long as the scabbard is on his belt. Okay? So go ahead, you should be taking notes on what are the key events in this story, what is happening in each of these paragraphs, and then using that to fill in your chart. That's your assignment for today and for this reading. You'll probably you'll probably be using this reading also for next week, but just for this first read through, you're just focused on what are those key events in each section. All right. See you later.